The sun shimmered on the surface of the lake, casting golden ripples that danced toward the dock where I stood barefoot. Towel draped over my shoulder, trying to shake off a feeling I couldn't name. It was early July, the kind of humid stillness that clung to your skin and made the world feel paused. My father's lake house sat quiet behind me, tucked into the trees like a secret, just as it had every summer of my childhood. But this year, I returned older 19 new and, somehow, everything felt unfamiliar. My father had invited me to spend a few weeks with him. Probably to check that college hadn't ruined me. We hadn't spoken much during the semester, just the occasional text, a phone call on my birthday. He was the kind of man who meant well in silence, who showed love in gestures like groceries already in the fridge, or clean towels stacked on my bed. I missed being a kid here when things were simpler, and I didn't question every thought I had. Back then, summers were made of cannonballs off the dock and watching fireflies until I fell asleep on the porch. But something had shifted in me this past year. I couldn't pinpoint when I started noticing the curve of a guy's neck or the way his hands moved when he spoke. It wasn't something I talked about, especially not with my father. Especially not here. I stepped into the water, 1 foot after the other, the lake cool against my skin. It wrapped around me like a memory familiar, but strange in its weight. I swam out a few meters, floating on my back, eyes closed, letting the sun soak into my face. For the first time in days, my thoughts quieted. Then, I heard footsteps on the dock. I turned my head. A tall figure approached, shirtless, towel slung casually over his shoulder, just like mine. The outline was instantly recognizable. Even after all these years, Daniel, he smiled when he saw me. That slow, effortless grin that used to make me feel 10 years old again. Like the little boy trying to impress his dad's best friend. Didn't think anyone else was up this early, he called out. I tensed, but tried not to show it. Could say the same. He dropped his towel at the edge of the dock, crouched, and tested the water with his hand. Still cold, he muttered, more to himself. Then, without another word, he dove in. A clean arc, smooth like muscle memory, followed by a small splash. He surfaced beside me, brushing his wet hair back, droplets glinting in the sunlight. Been a while, he said, catching his breath. I nodded, trying to ignore the sudden tightness in my chest. He looked different than I remembered, more worn around the edges, but in a way that made him seem realer somehow. His body still held that casual strength, but his eyes, they looked tired, or thoughtful, maybe both. I didn't know you were coming, I said. Your dad invited me for the weekend, needed a break from the city. He looked out across the lake. This place never changes. He was right. The dock still creaked, the trees still leaned over the water, like they were listening in, and yet, nothing felt the same to me. Not the silence, not Daniel. We swam slowly, not talking much. The water between us shifted with the smallest movement. Every time he turned his head, I caught myself watching him, how the sunlight touched his cheekbones, how his fingers broke the surface in long, confident strokes. I told myself it was nostalgia, just old admiration. But it wasn't that. You've grown up, he said suddenly. I laughed once, nervously. Guess that happens. He glanced at me, then looked away, his face unreadable. College treating. You okay, Yeah. Busy, complicated. Good, complicated or bad? Still figuring that part out. He nodded as though he understood something I hadn't said. The silence between us returned, but it didn't feel empty. It was charged. Like static, before a storm, he swam a little ahead of me, then turned onto his back, floating effortlessly. Eyes closed. I let my gaze linger on him, on the angles of his face, the rise and fall of his chest. I shouldn't have, but I did. And then, as if sensing it, he spoke without opening his eyes. You're quiet. I guess I have a lot on my mind. Anything worth saying out loud? I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. My throat tightened. My thoughts scattered. I dove underwater instead, letting the lake swallow my hesitation. When I surfaced, he had already swum back toward the dock. He pulled himself up with ease, muscles flexing against the early light. He didn't look back as he grabbed his towel, drying his hair. Then, casually, he called over his shoulder, "Join me for coffee." My heart thudded once, deep and loud. I treaded water, unsure for a moment, before nodding. He was already walking toward the house. I stayed in the water a moment longer. Alone again. But not untouched. The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft gurgle of the coffee machine and the occasional chirp of cicadas beyond the window. I sat at the counter, damp hair curling at my neck, a mug warming my hands. Daniel stood across from me, barefoot, flipping through an old newspaper he probably wasn't reading. The morning light painted gentle shadows across his back, catching in the folds of his t-shirt. We hadn't said much since the swim. Not that we needed to. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was something else. Like we were both trying not to wake something that had just begun to stir. So, he said eventually, without looking up, "You seeing anyone?" The question landed heavier than it should have. I hesitated, then shrugged. "Not really." He glanced at me, eyes narrowing slightly, not unkindly. "That a no or a none of your business? It's a complicated." He smiled faintly and sipped his coffee. "College relationships usually are." I didn't reply. My throat was tight again. I wasn't sure what I was more afraid of, telling him the truth or hearing something honest in return. Instead, I asked, "What about you? Anyone special?" He snorted. "Special's a strong word. Let's just say I've had my share of temporary people." By choice? I asked, before I could stop myself. His expression shifted, eyes softening just a little. "Sometimes. Other times, I just didn't know how to stay." I nodded, trying to act like I understood. But all I could think about was how I used to admire him as a kid. Daniel had always been a kind of mystery, charming without trying, generous in a quiet way. He was the man who fixed the broken fence with one hand and tossed me into the lake with the other. The man who once taught me how to skip stones and made me believe the world could be steady, and now he was here, talking like someone who'd lost his footing. "I think I've been hiding," I said suddenly, surprising even myself. He looked up. "From what?" I stared at the steam curling above my mug. "From myself, maybe. From knowing things I don't want to explain to people." He studied me for a long moment. His eyes didn't waver. "You don't have to explain anything, not to anyone who matters." The words hit somewhere deep. I felt something loosen in my chest, like a knot beginning to uncoil. I wondered if he realized how much that meant. If he could see how badly I'd needed someone to say exactly that. He set his mug down and leaned on the counter. Arms folded. "You always had this quiet about you. Even when you were little, like you were watching everything, trying to figure out what fit." "Maybe nothing fits," I murmured. "Or maybe you just haven't found the right shape yet." There was a weight to his voice, like he wasn't just talking about me. Like he knew what it felt like to live in a body that didn't always feel like home. The air between us thickened, not with tension, but with something unspoken. Recognition maybe, or reflection. I couldn't tell which of us was seeing the other more clearly. Later that afternoon, he invited me to walk down to the edge of the woods, where the lake narrowed into a marshy inlet. We carried lemonade in glass jars, the condensation dripping down our fingers. The sun was heavy and golden, casting long shadows on the trail. "Used to come here with your dad all the time," he said as we settled on a fallen log, "back when we thought growing up meant getting our own apartments and learning how to cook." And not. "Whatever this is," he chuckled. "This is something else entirely." I picked at the bark with my thumb, wondering if I was being brave or stupid. Did you ever feel like you weren't allowed to want certain things? Daniel didn't answer right away. The cicadas buzzed louder. He exhaled slowly, then said, "There are things I've wanted that I buried so deep. I convinced myself they'd never been real." That silence returned. Not cold, just full. His words curled around my chest and settled there, warm and aching. I looked at him. Really looked at the flecks of grey in his beard, the line between his brows that hadn't been there 5 years ago, the way he sat slightly turned toward me even when he wasn't speaking. And for a moment, I imagined what it would feel like to reach out. Not out of impulse, but out of truth. My fingers brushed the edge of the jar instead. He turned toward me then, just slightly, enough that our shoulders almost touched. You ever feel like some moments last longer than they're supposed to? I nodded. Like right now. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. The sun dipped lower and the light turned amber. Our jars emptied. The world around us settled into stillness. And even though nothing had been said out loud, I walked back to the house knowing everything had changed. The evening brought a breeze that softened the heat of the day, whispering through the trees like secrets passed between old friends. I stood on the back porch, arms resting on the railing, watching the lake darken into a sheet of black glass. Behind me, the house glowed with warm light. Daniel was inside, somewhere between the kitchen and the living room, moving in that unhurried way of his, like nothing ever demanded more than it needed to. I'd stayed quiet since the walk. The air between us was thick with what had gone unspoken, and I didn't trust myself to be the one to break it. There was safety in silence, but also danger. Every unspoken thought stretched the distance between us tighter. When Daniel stepped out, the screen door creaked behind him. He joined me without a word, hands slipping into the pockets of his jeans. For a moment, we both just stared at the lake. The moonlight caught the corner of his jaw, illuminating the thoughtful pull of his lips. You're quiet again, he said. Not accusing, just observing. I'm trying not to say the wrong thing. He tilted his head slightly, looking at me. Or trying not to say the right thing out loud. That question sat heavy between us. I didn't answer, because we both already knew. He leaned on the railing beside me, close but not touching. You've been carrying something. I see it. Been seeing it since this morning. I didn't expect to see you, I said, softer than I intended, and now I can't stop thinking. He turned to face me more fully, one elbow bent on the wood. About what? I hesitated, swallowing back everything too big for words. About what it means when someone makes you feel seen in a way no one else has, even if they're not supposed to. His gaze didn't waver, not once. Who decides what we're supposed to feel? Family, friends, the world. I looked down my dad. That name hung in the air like a warning bell. Daniel looked away then, toward the trees. He doesn't see you, does he? Not all of me. I forced a smile. And I don't know how to let him. Daniel stayed silent for a while. Then he spoke, quieter now. He's a good man, but he's spent his life seeing things only in terms of what's familiar. What's easy to understand. And you. He exhaled. I stopped chasing easy a long time ago. There it was. Again that glimmer of truth beneath everything he said. He wasn't just here for a weekend getaway. Something had drawn him back to something he'd buried just as deeply. I remember, I said, glancing over, when I was 14. You took me kayaking down the creek that runs behind the inlet. I was terrified of flipping over. You told me the trick was to lean into the tilt, not away from it. He smiled at the memory. Most people fight the current, makes them easier to tip. I think I've been doing that with my whole life. His smile faded, but his eyes stayed soft. Then stop, lean in. There was a long pause. The wind rustled the trees, and the lake lapped gently at the dock. Then he reached out slowly, hesitantly, and let his hand brush mine on the railing. Just that. No sudden movements. Just enough to let me feel the heat of him, the quiet steadiness. In his touch, my chest tightened, but I didn't pull away. He looked at me again. "This isn't a mistake," he said, "even if it feels like one." His voice was quiet, controlled, but I heard something in it I hadn't before. Vulnerability, longing, permission. My breath caught. The edge I'd been standing on since that morning finally gave way, but I didn't fall. I leaned. Just slightly. Just enough. And he leaned too. Our shoulders touched, not dramatically, not romantically, just a quiet, deliberate contact. Something small that meant something enormous. But then, from inside the house, I heard the front door slam shut. Voices followed. Familiar, casual, careless. My father's laugh echoed through the entryway, followed by the unmistakable sound of him calling Daniel's name. I stiffened. Daniel's hand pulled back instantly. The moment was gone. He stood up straight, rubbing the back of his neck like he was waking from a dream. "Guess we're not alone anymore." I turned my gaze back to the lake, heart pounding in my throat. He started toward the door, then paused. "I'll see you inside." I nodded, not trusting my voice. He disappeared into the house, his silhouette swallowed by the warm light. And I stayed outside a little longer, staring at the water that now rippled with movement, the stillness of before broken. The living room hummed with the low rhythm of conversation. My father's voice rang loudest, full of nostalgia and easy laughter. He stood near the fireplace, gesturing with a beer in hand, recounting some story from their younger days. Daniel, across from him, wore a practiced smile. He nodded along, his posture relaxed, eyes bright but only just enough. I could tell he wasn't entirely present. I wasn't either. I lingered in the hallway, part of me wanting to slip upstairs and disappear. But the other part, the one that had leaned into him by the lake, wouldn't let me. So I stayed, half hidden, watching. The two men who had shaped most of my life without ever knowing the pieces they missed. My father clapped Daniel on the back with easy affection. "Man, it's good having you here again. Like old times." "Yeah," Daniel said softly, almost. He caught my gaze over my father's shoulder. Just a flicker. Barely a second. But something in that look anchored me. Later, when the crowd had thinned, when the neighbors and cousins and all the lingering noise had gone quiet, found Daniel out by the garage, leaning against the side of his car, arms crossed. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded but didn't smile. "You disappeared." Needed air. He didn't move. Just studied me, like he was searching for something I hadn't said yet. I kept thinking. I continued, stepping closer, that maybe I imagined all of it. "The lake, the way you looked at me." You didn't imagine it, he said quickly. "Not 1 second of it." The breeze tugged at my shirt. I stopped a foot away, close enough to notice the rise and fall of his chest. "But it's complicated," I said. "You're him, my dad's best friend." "And you're you," he said, voice low. "And that's what terrifies me." We stood in silence again, the way people do when too many truths hang between them. Everything felt so fragile, like if I moved wrong, the world would tilt. "I thought I knew what betrayal felt like," I murmured. "But now I'm not sure who I'd be betraying." He closed his eyes, just for a moment. "Maybe it's not about betrayal. Maybe it's about finally telling the truth." To who? I asked. To ourselves, he said. "And maybe, eventually, to him." I felt the words settle into my chest, like a slow burn. Daniel wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't pushing. He was standing there, steady, offering a choice I never thought I'd have. Asterisk, a moth fluttered against the porch light. Somewhere inside, the television murmured faintly. The rest of the world went on, oblivious. Asterisk, I used to think love had to follow rules, I said. A certain shape, a certain path. But you make me wonder if maybe it just needs to be real. Asterisk, his eyes softened, and for a second, the pain in them broke into something gentler, hope, maybe. Or peace. Asterisk, you don't owe me anything, he said. But if you ever want to stop running from the things that feel true, I'll be here. Asterisk, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. The faint jingle broke the quiet. I should probably head back to the cabin, it's late. Asterisk, I nodded, not ready to ask him to stay, not ready to let him go, either. Asterisk, he brushed past me lightly, and just as he opened the driver's side door, he paused. If this is all it ever is, a weekend, a few quiet conversations, I'll still be grateful. You gave me something I didn't know I needed. Asterisk, I watched the door shut. The engine turned over. The headlights swept across the gravel like slow-moving thoughts, and then he was gone, the red glow of his taillights disappearing down the road. Asterisk, the next morning, I sat by the lake again, alone this time. The same still water, the same trees, but everything had changed. I thought of the way he'd looked at me, not like a kid, not like a mistake, but like someone who finally made sense. Asterisk, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel ashamed. Asterisk, some truths live quietly for years before they find the right shape. Ours had barely spoken aloud, but it existed now, out in the open. Real, undeniable, and unfinished. And I knew, somehow, that wasn't the end of it.